Welcome, Spartans, to Podcast Evolved, your home for Halo. I am your host, Oran, and with me today we have Aaron.
Hi, guys.
And the woman, Krysta.
Yay! It's me!
It's her! I have to read the script as it's written, so no apologies.
I wrote that in for you.
This week's topic will continue our character dossier series, where we're going to talk about the Librarian. She is very important in the ancient Halo universe, as well as the present Halo universe. So we will talk all about her, her influences, and kind of characters surrounding her. But before we get started, we have some housekeeping. If you're new to the show, welcome. Podcast Evolve is the host to a variety of shows. This is our main show where we report the Halo news, the Halo lore, and talk to you directly, our listeners. We also have our mission debrief, our Halo book club, our builds with blocks, and our Halo headlines. And we also have a partnership with HCS Pro Talk with Will and Josh, where they discuss the latest information within the competitive Halo scene with an emphasis on community every week. So you can follow them at HCS Pro Talk on your favorite podcasting service, and you can learn more about our other shows on our awesome website, halopodcast.com. If you're already a fan of the show, please rate us and leave us a review. We greatly appreciate all the feedback we receive from our listeners to improve the quality of all of our shows. And thank you so much to all of our patrons. You guys are amazing, and you definitely keep the lights on and allow us to do so much more, and we've been growing and growing and growing over the last couple of years thanks to you guys. So thank you guys so much. If you would like to become a patron, you can check out what we have to offer at patreon.com/HaloPodcastEvolved to learn more. And finally, we encourage our listeners to support Audible, where they can enjoy the growing collection of every Halo novel all in one place, along with thousands of other novels, guidance wellness programs, and more. And you can use the URL audibletrial.com/podcastevolved to learn more and start your free trial today. Right, now, the Librarian. But before we talk about the Librarian, it's been a little while since we did our last dossier. Krysta, do you want to regale us on what our last dossier was? Just kind of a brief overview so that everyone who missed it can go back and listen to it because it was amazing.
Oh yes, I would love to. The last dossier we did was of 343 Guilty Spark, which I may or may not have a obsession with. Of course, this is going to be spoilers for some of the books, specifically Point of Light and the Forerunner series, so we're just going to kind of go through some of the points we talked about on that episode. So originally, he was an ancient human named Chakas. He would become friends with the Isodidact, which is not the Didact in Halo 4. He's another Didact, very confusing. He was composed after being mortally wounded on Zeta Halo, and then eventually became the Monitor 343 Guilty Spark. He would eventually be killed, quote, unquote, by Master Chief in Halo 3. His carapace was eventually found and revived by the crew of the Rubicon, and he would go on to serve on the Ace of Spades and become friends with the human crew. Currently, he has just kind of yeeted out of the Halo universe onto this clone of Earth called Bastion, and that's where he currently resides. Somewhere we have no idea where it is right now, so if you thought he would show up in Halo Infinite, too bad.
We all had our hopes, though, as soon as we learned from, the third page where they're going to go to Zeta Halo. So end spoilers there for Point of Light. But that was a pretty good recap of 343, and of course, we get down into the nitty and gritty in our last character dossier. And I also want to shout out, we did interview Tim Dadabo, so that is another episode. I don't want to be so self-serving, but to plug our own stuff. But that interview is amazing, and if you have any sort of liking for that man as a human being, as well as 343, it's a really good interview. He is quite a just wonderful man.
He has some great tidbits on early Bungie and stuff like that as well. That's really interesting that he talks about. So if you want some early Bungie lore and stuff like that, He worked with a bunch of cool people at Bungie that he really got close to, so he has some fun stories.
Yes, indeed. Right, well now for the topic of the show, I'm going to swing it over to Aaron, and let's learn about the Librarian. Who was she, who is she, and how does her height compare to that other character in that other video game?
I was doing the script for this, and it gave me flashbacks to having to talk about the lore of the mantle. This is one of these super duper long ones where there's a stupid amount of backstory. So, some basic facts to get out of the way before we start. The librarian's actual name is not the librarian. She is called First Light Weaves Living Song.
Doesn't quite flow off the tongue.
No, it's not quite as smooth as like Librarian or Life Shaper. It's a little bit of a mouthful.
Even some of the other Forerunner names are easier to kind of say, but not hers.
Yeah. Born Stellar makes Eternal Lasting and is much easier to roll out than that. Also, we very rarely ever see her real name mentioned anywhere, so it's just Librarian. She was born approximately 108,445 BCE, and she died roughly 97,445 BCE, which makes her, at my rough maths, about 11,000 years old.
Oh, wow, she's still a spring chicken.
Yep, she lived quite some time. This is the bit Krysta has added crucial information in here. So she is 2.9 meters tall, or 9.6 feet, which is, and I quote, literally the same height as Lady D.
In Resident Evil Village.
I suppose it's technically fitting because she is already the Halo mommy, so...
Yeah, we like Halo mommy.
I'm not sure. It didn't give me a value for her cleavage, so we are unaware if she competes with Lady D in that department.
Only time will tell. Once the Halo fan fiction comes out, we'll learn more, and we'll let you know.
That's a throwaway line for the next author writing a Halo novel about anything to do with the Librarian. Just putting it out there. She weighed approximately 200 kilograms, or 441 pounds. Her hair was white, her eyes were violet. Her rank was Life Shaper. And a point of interest, the Librarian was born with only 5 fingers in each hand instead of the more standard 6 or 7 that most Forerunners have.
Which is something we only recently learned, right?
Yeah, I think that was something that, well, I it was at least highlighted in Point of Light. I didn't pay, I guess, that close attention to Halo 4, but it seemed like a relatively new trait that we learned.
It's a good job I linked it here so I can go and see. I don't remember paying any attention to her hands in Halo 4. Yeah, you can see she's only got 4 fingers in the cutscene. Right, so she does have it in the cutscene, but none of us paid much attention to it. But it makes her suspiciously close to humans, which is something that plays a part in the Librarian's life. We have a lot to talk about, so I'm going to skim through this and you guys jump in wherever you want. But in the Librarian's early life, she received the nickname Librarian from her teachers because she liked to travel through great stores of knowledge. Her mother died when she was a child. She was raised by her father and AIs, as all good Forerunner children are. As a child, she was haunted by nightmares due to her, they call it a chaotic grasp of living time. That's a fun fact we get in Point of Light. The Librarian is like the great master of living time. That's what we know her as, but we find out here that as a child, she struggled with it all and was haunted by it quite a lot. I think they specifically mentioned she spent a lot of her time as a child medically sedated so that she could sleep. Next up, she received tutoring from another Forerunner called Harmony in Gifted Symmetry. She was able to help her navigate her nightmares and eventually understand living time the way that she did. Librarian, on her first mutation, hoped that she would lose her 4 fingers and become slightly more normal. But she did not. She retained those and would eventually go on to try to solve the mystery of it. She went to a place called the Master Library of Keth-Sidon, and there she discovered information on the Theoretical rate. I think we've discussed those before in our history of like the Forerunners and their rates. They were an ancient rate of Forerunners who were folded into, I think, the Builders, because they had some slightly funky beliefs that humans and Forerunners may have a common genetic ancestry. So they were pushed to one side because that's a little too much crazy talk for the Forerunners.
It's too controversial. We don't want to be like humans. They're stinky. We
can't share controversial opinions like that, even if some Forerunners only have 5 fingers. They're just freaks.
See ya.
The librarian would go on to meet the isodidact. They would eventually get in a relationship. The isodidact did have another forerunner interested in him. She was called Endurance of Will, but the didact eventually chose the librarian. They would go on to settle down on the forerunner world of Numdagro, where they would have several children together who would all go on to become warrior servants like their dad.
Was this the isodidact, or this is the didact?
That's the didact.
Okay, alright. Because you said iso, so I just wanted to...
Oh, did I?
All of the librarian's children were spawned from the didact.
Then that was a slip of the tongue, yes. Didact.
Iso's not here yet.
No, he doesn't come until much later.
Yeah, he wouldn't be born at this stage, so he's yet a glint in the future. Next up, we go to the next section of our life, which is basically the war with ancient humanity. So, at the start of the war, the Forerunners don't know why humanity have decided to lash out and start attacking them, and the Librarian was actually the one to call for the swift extermination of humanity in retaliation for their attacks. And it was the Didact who actually came to bat for humanity and said that no, they should be sent back to their homeworld to learn from their mistakes and develop and grow as a species. So this is a weird flip of the tables from how they're going to turn later. This is not the Librarian we know later in the games. Like, that Librarian would not call for the extermination of a species. Thankfully, the Council sided with the Didact and decided that they wouldn't exterminate humanity completely. During the war with humanity, all of the Librarian's children were killed.
Oof.
Yeah. Fun fact, their recorded last moments in, like, Forerunner black boxes would be in their, like, war sphinxes and would be left to monitor the Didact later in the game, because that's just an extra level of, like, creepy.
Yeah, because why not?
There's one thing you learn, the more you, like, dive into the Forerunners, they are fond of very unsettling, creepy things.
They're kind of fucked up. They're super fucked up.
They are completely fucked up. What have we got next? The later stages of the Forerunner War, the Human Forerunner War, they discovered the Flood was the actual motivation. The Librarian is then promoted to Life Shaper. This is a prestigious title. I believe it said there were only a handful of other Life Shapers in the history of the Ecumen. And she was put in charge of the Flood Research Program. Humans would eventually be defeated on Charam Hakur. Now, the Librarian, who's changed her mind now, decided that humans and their culture should be spared because they may be able to learn from humans how they were able to resist the Flood. Because during the war, the Forerunners had observed that the humans were able to repel the Flood and sometimes, like, shift them off a planet completely.
Which wasn't even the case. It was the Flood doing that to make the Forerunners off balance, right? It was literally just the Flood manipulating the Forerunners.
The Flood were bluffing the entire time, but unfortunately the poor Forerunners didn't know this at the time. But the Forerunner Council did not agree with this approach, and they instead opted for the more drastic measure of composing all the survivors from Charam Hakur, taking whatever humans were left and de-evolving them and putting them on Earth, which at the time was called Ur de Terrene. So they were de-evolved back to cavemen, and then the essences of the composed humans from Charam Hakur were put in their DNA, and they were given to the Librarian to monitor on Earth. Slowly over time, I think it says about 10,000 years, the humans had actually started to re-evolve back to, like, basic humans. So they had shed off the de-evolution that the Forerunners had put on them, and the Librarian realised there was something special about them, so she took all of her life workers off the planet and basically left it to fall into the background out of anyone's attention. She left some automated equipment on the planet that would imprint her geish on key humans, and that would go on to basically make her the equivalent of a god on Earth. Every human sees the Life Shaper at birth and they all worship her.
Kind of fucked up. I'm trying to do a similar thing to people as well, so godhood and all that.
That's what TikTok's for, I guess.
Yeah, that's what I'm making TikToks for.
You just do your TikToks and you just get on people's minds so they can't stop thinking about you. And then they think you're a god. 1, 2, 3. As easy as that.
Prepare for ascension.
Look, whatever works. We're not gonna kink shame anyone here.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it.
Right, what have we got next? Okay, that's the short version of War with Ancient Humanity. There's a lot more to it.
This whole episode's a short version, let's be real, so, but go read the Forerunner books if you want the full details, but, I mean, we've talked about it at length, but yeah, it starts getting interesting, though, once the Halos get in.
Yes, if you would like the abbreviated version of the Forerunner Flood War, go and watch the terminals from Halo 4. They're about 15 minutes long in total, and that covers a lot of it. Next up, we have the Halos. So this was a project proposed by the Master Builder to create a weapon capable of defending the galaxy from the Flood. The Didact also proposed his own version of Shield Worlds. His idea was you would have Shield World bunkers dotted around the galaxy, and the Forerunners and their troops could move from world to world via portals and fight the Flood wherever they needed to. It was a pretty good solid theory because the Shield Worlds can all hide in slip space and are, in theory, unreachable by the Flood. But the Council decided to go with the Master Builder's proposal instead. So this would lead us to eventually 2 Halo arrays. Krysta, what were their names, please?
The senescent array is the older array, and the neoteric array is the newer array.
I knew I could rely on you.
This is the only reason you guys keep me around, is to remember that one piece of lore.
You can tell us which array is which, and then we can carry on again. Yes, the Master Builder wins. The Librarian realizes she has to either side with him or lose her station, sticking up for her husband. So she comes to a compromise with the Master Builder and sets up the conservation measure, which is basically a program to catalogue and preserve life in the galaxy so that it can be repopulated after the activation of the Halos. And that took the form of reserves on both the Greater Arc and the Lesser Arc, and reserves on the Halos themselves. They set this up, and then unfortunately the poor Didact has to go into exile because he lost his fight, so he's put in a cryptum, and the Librarian would relocate that cryptum to Erde Tyrene and set up an elaborate series of puzzles and quests and events that would only be triggered when a certain Born Stellar would eventually make his way to Earth. And then we move on to the next bit, which is Path Chthona. While the Librarian has the Didact off asleep, she has to keep herself useful to the Council, so she proposes an expedition to the satellite galaxy outside the Milky Way called Path Chthona, where they believe the Flood may have originated from. I think they also, at this stage, believe that it may have been where the precursors came from. She sells this to the Council as an expedition to see possibly where the Flood come from and we could find a cure. They build her a ship called the Audacity, and she heads over to the galaxy and finds ancient Forerunners still alive on a planet. It's all a bit weird. They're kind of de-evolved, and they're living there.
They're almost living in exile.
Yeah, they were too ashamed of their actions because it actually turns out that ancient Forerunners wiped out the precursors.
Like genocide.
Oh yes, they wiped almost all of them out with the exception of a handful.
They did a big genocide.
A very big genocide. And these guys were the survivors. They couldn't face going back to the Milky Way. So instead they chose to live a life here where they kind of de-evolve. Some of them live on as sentient creatures, and I think some of them live on as like livestock animals and all. It's a bit weird. But they've lived here for thousands of years and hidden away. The Librarian learns all of this information and basically finds out what caused the Flood was the Forerunners rising up against the Precursors and the Precursors wanting revenge. Well, they don't have all the details just yet. Also, thanks to Point of Light, we find out that while the Librarian was here, she discovers a cave where 2 precursors were sheltered by the ancient Forerunners. They were badly injured and chose to die rather than heal themselves, and they spawned a series of specimens, plants.
Yeah, they're like flowers, question mark?
It seems that the precursors spawned from these sort of flower-like creations. So she finds these samples. Now, these are pure, untainted precursor. They do not have the genetic memory of the ancient precursors that were wiped out. They do not harbour the grudge that the Gravemind has. So these could go on to form an entirely fresh precursor species. The Librarian takes them on her ship but keeps them secret from the council. And then she smuggles them to her secret base on Bastion.
I like her secret base is just an entire planet, because why not? What a great secret base.
Yeah, the Forerunners really seem to do an awful bad job of keeping track of their shield worlds. There are too many of them. And they're everywhere. She secures this world, Bastion, and reshapes it into like an idealized version of Earth. And on it, she sets up a nursery for these precursor samples and starts to nurture them over the centuries. She also has a copy of the Audacity built called the Eden, and its super secret mission is when the time is right, the precursor samples will be loaded onto it and it will be escorted by Forerunners to a secret place far outside the galaxy where the precursor species can start again from scratch. And that is her great plan to set right the crimes that ancient precursors did against the mantle by wiping out, or that the ancient Forerunners did by wiping out the precursors.
It also almost sets the timeline straight, because living time was horribly damaged when the flood was created because it was never really meant to be. So it created a nexus event, and then the Librarian had to send in the TVA to stop it.
Oh my gosh. Subtle. She's not wrong, though.
I mean, it is true. It is true, though. She does talk about how, like, this entire genocide of the precursors was unbalanced living time, and so it unbalanced living time one way, and then the flood kind of swung it back in the other direction. But she was hoping that creating or at least letting the precursors start to populate the galaxy again would balance out living time again.
Yeah, that's where we leave off with Bastion, and then we roll into the Flood Forerunner War, which is another really pleasant time in the history of the Librarian. The Librarian puts a plan in place to bring the Ur-Didact back out of exile to help fight the Flood. This plan is by implanting certain gases in ancient humans, and she sends one of her AIs to Born Stellar to coach him and encourage him to travel to Ur-Tyrene in search of treasure. He is looking for...
the greatest treasure of all, friendship.
Yes, friendship. And another man's wife. Those are the two great treasures.
Which he steals the wife from.
Yep. The ultimate treasure, stealing another man's wife.
Yeah, taking another man's wife.
He goes to Earth and sets those things in motion. There's a whole massive history. We will probably cover the Didacts at some stage because that's a whole other massive chunk of story in itself. But the Librarian would eventually meet Born Stellar on the Greater Arc. He, at this stage, was almost complete in his transformation into the Didact. He had to mind meld with the Ur-Didact at one stage, but because they had no access to the domain, that mind meld slowly took over Born Stellar and formed him into the Isodidact. Isodidact is the newer Didact, the younger one. He likes humans. Ur-Didact is the older Didact, and he will go on to hate humans. So if I get those confused at any point, you will know. At this stage, when they meet on the Greater Arc, they believe that the Ur-Didact is dead because the Master Builder sentenced him to death and had him executed and sent adrift on a ship in flood space. So, of course, naturally, the Isodidact and the Librarian shack up, and she takes him on as husband too. Would it be husband 1.5 because he's technically an improved version of the old one?
Maybe.
1.1. Next
He's
version.
younger and more mentally stable.
He's not a 2.0, he's like something else. They become a thing together, and then the librarian goes off back to continuing her task of indexing life in the galaxy. The Urdidact is eventually recovered, so he's been adrift in space for quite a few years and has been brutally mentally tortured by the Flood. The Grave Mind has broken his mind in quite a similar way to Mendicant Bias and Cortana and a few others. This Didact eventually comes back on the scene and snaps. He composes the humans that are on Omega Halo, which was parked outside the Greater Arc. The Librarian realizes that there is currently no saving the Urdidact and she has to do something drastic. So she orders Chantagreen and Monitor Chakas to round up the remaining humans and travel to the Lesser Arc. Chakas also takes the Isodidact there as well, and then the Greater Arc would later be destroyed by Mendicant Bias. The Librarian then travels to Requiem. She goes and locks up the Urdidact in the Cryptum, and now she has a good plan. She hopes that while the Urdidact is in the Cryptum, he will have access to the domain, and that will heal his psychological PTSD from the Flood. And it's a great plan in theory, but it's not going to work. She also sets things in motion because she plans for the Urdidact when he eventually comes out of the Cryptum. She wants him to teach humanity to do better than the Forerunners did and make themselves a better species. She leaves an imprint of herself in Requiem, and she also leaves the Janus key there, and both of those are intended for the Didact for when he awakens. Then we go on to the final stage of the Librarian's actual life, which is oddly only about halfway through everything. The Librarian, in an attempt to distract the Flood from finding the Lesser Arc, travels to Erdityrene and sends out a message to all the Forerunner ships still in the galaxy to draw them into the planet. So now the Flood know that she's there. When she arrives on Earth, she meets with Chantagreen, who has gathered up the last of the humans. She transfers the title of Life Shaper to Chant, and she sends her and the last of the life workers back to the Ark. Then she summons a Gargantua class transport that Chakas had. She summons that to Earth, and she has that break down and reassemble to form the portal at Voy that constructs the generator, and then she has it buried, and that will be humanity's link to the Ark when they're ready. And then the Flood arrive at Earth, and they bring a message in the form of a couple of humans with the imprint of the Lord of Admirals and a few of his soldiers. And the Lord of Admirals breaks the news to the Librarian that when the halos are fired, they will destroy all precursor technology, which the Librarian knew, and then they tell her that the domain is actually a precursor creation, and that when they fire the halos, it will destroy the domain. And then she realizes that she has left the Urdidact locked in a cryptum.
With no internet.
Yes, he's locked in this cryptum with no internet to go insane by himself.
Yeah, that's what happens when I don't have internet either.
Yeah.
It's very traumatic. She realizes bad things are about to happen. And the domain's very important as well because it is the stored repository of all Forerunner and Precursor knowledge. And if it's destroyed, that's not a good thing. So as her final act, the Librarian does two things. She builds a facility in Mount Kilimanjaro and leaves another one of her imprints there. She also uses Catalog to send a message to the Isodidact on the Lesser Arc. In it, she has instructions on what he can do to fix the domain, but the Isodidact actually doesn't open it at the time because he thinks it's a trick by the Flood. Shortly after she sends that message, she's actually killed in the firing of the halos because that's the last act that the Isodidact has. He gets this message, he thinks it's the Flood. He then fires the halos. And then this takes us on to the librarian's life after death, basically. Anyone have any points on the librarian's life or anything they want to say before we go on to Dead Librarian?
She's so complicated. There's so much. She does so much shit. It's so hard to remember all of it, but she's a really cool character. She definitely mirrors Dr. Halsey in so many ways. And I don't know. I think she's a great character. I love her in the Didact. And just all of the mysteries surrounding them. And every time the librarian shows up in any book or media, you know shit's about to be explained.
Absolutely.
Also, I don't think I've ever seen her with a book. Ever. I'm not sure why they call her the librarian, but, usually you are around books and stuff. So, I think she needs to figure shit out.
They have digital books, Krysta, because the librarian has proven that digital books are the way to go.
No.
Sorry, Krysta.
No.
I will say that it is nice to learn about the librarian before she was an adult, because it's everyone comes from somewhere, and it's always oh well, what came before Master Chief? What came before the UNSC and all this kind of stuff. So to see how influential the librarian is, to learn how she grew up and what she went through and experienced as a youth was interesting to learn about. And it just kind of helps round out this amazing character and all the capabilities that she does, because as we'll learn with her legacy, she does a lot of shit when she's alive, but she does, so much, not more, but she continues to do a lot after she's gone with the legacy that she's kept with her geishas and imprints.
Also, now that we've mentioned it, because of all the backstory we got for early librarian's life, it definitely makes me crave the similar backstory for the Didact. I'm going to need that someday. Just putting that out there if Jeff or anyone's listening.
Jeff, please, we know you're listening.
The point of light treatment for the Didact would be appreciated. So, I have summed up the legacy of the librarian in 3 bullet points, because otherwise we'd be here forever, but we can fill these out as we need. The first one is that the Isodidact didn't read the librarian's last message for almost a century. He stayed on the Lesser Ark and monitored things, and then when he did read it, it sets in motion the events of the short story Promises to Keep from Halo Fractures. I believe we have a book club on that you can go and listen to. The short version of that is they go back to Mithrilian because they realise that the domain is actually there in the core of Mithrilian itself. They find out that the AI, I forget its name now, that runs the domain is badly damaged, angry, upset, and one of the Forerunners merges with that AI to repair the domain and bring it back online. That is the short version of what happens there. It's quite a good story.
It's definitely worth reading.
Yeah, and it sets up what the last of the Forerunners did after the reseeding of the galaxy. So it's something you can just go and have a look through. Okay, now we get on to the librarian's imprints. So the first imprint we come across is in Halo 4. This imprint kidnaps Cortana and then talks to John.
Which is a great way to introduce yourself to anyone. Kidnap one of their closest friends and then introduce yourself. Be like, hey, I know I kidnapped your daughter, but my name's Krysta. It's really nice to meet you. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, yo, what's up?
I'm going to offer you some gifts, but not really tell you what it means. She tells John that the Didact is insane and he's going to try to wipe out humanity with the Composer, and that she can make John immune to the Composer, and he agrees. She gives him a zap. We don't exactly know what else she did to him, but he can no longer be composed, which is always good. It just knocks him out for a while, which maybe not ideal.
I mean, you get a nice nap. You don't have to watch the people get composed as well around you. You get to sleep through that, which is great. Sleeping through traumatic events.
Well, that is a good point, because Cortana did not take that well.
No, Cortana had to watch all of it, but Master Chief got a nice little nap.
That haunting line she has at the composing scene or after when she's like, I could hear them screaming in the data link as they were uploaded, and you're like, oh, that's extra fucked up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, ooh. Oops.
All roads lead back to the Forerunners were fucked up.
Pretty much.
Okay, this imprint of the Librarian also goes on to deal with Halsey in the fantastic addition to Halo 4 called Spartan Ops, one of the best campaigns you'll ever play. Isn't that right, Krysta?
I don't want to live anymore.
For those that have listened to Mission Debrief, Krysta played all of them again.
I had to play all of them again for Mission Debrief.
And almost lost the will to live.
Yeah, I had a couple bouts of insanity.
In its defense, the story's good. It's the super repetitive missions that are not.
It's just, you know, the cutscenes are really nice, but actually playing the game, awful.
Yeah, you're going like, oh, I know this level. They've put force fields in it. Yay. And then, oh, I know this level again. They moved that thing over there. Yay.
I'm just gonna mindlessly kill enemies for like 50 hours.
Yay.
Yay.
Not the most fun, but it does tie up the story in this. So the short version is Dr. Halsey gains access to the imprint. The imprint tells Halsey that humanity is ready to move on to the next stage, and she gives Halsey the Janus key and tells Halsey to take it to the absolute record, and humanity can use all of the Forerunners' technology to ascend to be a better species. And then the imprint uploads itself from Requiem to the absolute record, and then Requiem is destroyed. And that is the very short version of what happens there. And then this sets up the events of Halo Escalation, another fantastic intro in the Halo story, just like Spartan Ops.
Yay.
It's just a story that goes nowhere.
It's really sad. The Janus key was in Escalation awful.
And it's a shame because it's like the absolute record was building to such seemingly like some really cool and interesting lore that I guess they had like the right, like it was almost like 343 wrote themselves in a hole to where they're like, we can't really give out this information, although it would be so cool because it would kind of mess up other stuff.
It was like the ultimate cheat code to everything was just...
It's the ultimate luminary.
Yes, it's the Find My iPhone for all Forerunner technology. Was the short version of what the absolute record was, and we couldn't have humanity have that just yet. Also, fun shout out to Escalation where Dr. Halsey takes out a contender class AI by herself.
Yeah, she just hacks it, you know. I like how she does it. She's like, yeah, I hacked you. And it's just like, wait, what?
Possibly the most OP move in the entire Halo franchise ever by one single person.
You know, it's Halsey. It's okay.
You gotta love it.
Right, so, unless I'm mistaken, there's only one more imprint of the Librarian that we know of, and this is the imprint we meet during the... Do we call it the Rion Forge saga novel series?
I think we call it the Ryan Forge saga.
Ryan. I've fallen into the audiobook trap. I say Rion because of that first audiobook. It's ruined me forever.
David says Rion as well. What a scrub.
I blame the audiobook.
Yeah, I think it's a saga because there's definitely going to be another book or at least another story because I feel like Ryan and her crew have another story to tell.
Fair enough.
If you want to say trilogy right now because there's 3, but it will soon be saga.
We will go with saga just and be optimistic that we get another one. Right, the short version of this, you can go and listen to the book clubs and read the books. Spark he eventually makes his way to Mount Kilimanjaro. There he interacts with the imprint of the Librarian that she left just before her death. And the imprint of the Librarian gives him a key and gives him a choice. She says, you can come with me to the Absolute Record and we can go into storage and live out eternity together. Or you can stay with your new friends and help them. He does ask about his old friends and like he wants to be uploaded to the domain to be with Gamelpar and that, but the librarian basically warns him that you get the good with the bad with something like that, and it's not maybe the ideal thing you want to do to yourself. Spark makes a choice. He stays with the Ace of Spades. He takes the key, and that eventually leads them to Bastion, which we've covered this all really in Spark's dossier. But the Bastion events lead to him being given control of Bastion, and the Eden, which is the replacement to the Audacity, launching with the Forerunner whose name I can't remember, and going off to reseed the precursors in another galaxy. And this is the last we see. This imprint of the Librarian also uploads itself to the Absolute Record, and unless we come across any more, we are fresh out of imprints. And that is the last we have of any interactions with the Librarian and her plan. What do we think?
She's a cool lady. We've said it time and again. You know, like it's always one of those things where it's like we think we've seen kind of the last of her, but she keeps popping up. So I think it's important to know kind of who she is and where she came from, because we never know when we're gonna see more of her. Like she has such a presence in the galaxy. She could be anywhere and she is everywhere. So it's just really, really interesting. And yeah, it can get confusing because she is everywhere. But yeah, I think that was very, very well done, Aaron. Thank you.
Good job, Aaron. There's a lot to cover.
There is a lot to cover, and this is assuming that 343 don't decide to whip up another imprint someday when required.
Oh, they could.
That's like the most convenient thing about the Librarian now, is you can just have her uploaded anywhere.
Inconvenient for us.
I'm kind of hoping we're going to reassemble all these imprints and make a Librarian.
Maybe that could have been her one of her plans, because the woman loved her plans. Jesus Christ. I hope one day we find her Google Drive that has all of her plans in it.
Yeah, right.
My plans by the Librarian.
They're out there somewhere. That is basically the history of the Librarian. I have 3 minor bits of trivia that I pulled off Wikipedia, nothing terribly exciting. For those that have been keeping track, the Librarian first appeared in the Halo 3 terminals. She is identified under the name L. I believe there is L and D for Librarian and Didact, and it's basically a back and forth series of messages between them, and this is what's taking place while the Librarian is on Earth waiting for the Flood to come and get her, and the Didact is on the Ark trying to persuade her to come back to him. They're interesting, and I believe those terminals change a little bit depending on which difficulty you play Halo on, or Halo 3 on, so you can pull all those up on Halopedia and read all the differences. She refers to the part of Earth she lived on as Eden, as in the Garden of Eden, because it would not be complete without biblical references. And the only other little bit of information we had is that apparently at one stage Bungie had considered calling the Proto-Gravemind the Librarians instead. But thankfully they did not go through with that, and the Librarian name got used elsewhere. That's about it. We don't really have a huge amount more on her. In terms of will we see her in Infinite, how will she relate to Infinite, is the basic version is her plan will continue to roll forward, and if things get really crazy, we'll meet another imprint. What do we think? Odds on seeing a Librarian imprint on Zeta Halo?
Probably.
Yeah. I think there's going to be either an imprint or an audiobook or like both. They've already confirmed that like the kind of audio log type of a mechanic in Halo 5 will return to some capacity. Kind of see how they implement that. And we got a lot of different sort of dialogue and chatter from characters from across the galaxy that can point to influences from the Librarian or the Librarian herself. And with Zeta Halo being such a rich history in of itself as a location, she has to be somewhere on there, just like she was at Kilimanjaro and elsewhere and Requiem and all that. So yeah, I definitely think we're going to see and hear and learn more about the Librarian and just whatever plan that she has that's going to, throw curveballs at the story.
Krysta, what do you think? Anything else?
She's a tall lady.
Krysta's fixated on the tall lady part. Up next, scene in Halo Infinite where she smothers John against the floor in his armor.
Oh, yeah, please. I would love to see that imprint.
Allow me to imprint you with my gash and then throw him against a wall.
Nice. The gash.
Alright, guys. That is the Librarian covered in all of her details. Our next character dossier will be on the husbands of the Librarian. And if you're really good, we will tell you about that exciting night when the three of them were on the Greater Arc together.
What?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I must have skipped that chapter.
It's right there. The pages were probably stuck together, Krysta,
Oh, okay. Well, I'll have to go through it again.
But yes, we will cover the history of the Didacts, and that is also quite a sizable lore-filled episode, so prepare yourself for that. Right. Oran, I will hand over to you to take us away.
Yes, thank you, Aaron. Thank you all for joining us, the listeners of this wonderful show. We mentioned at the top of the show, you can find every episode to all of our shows on our website, halopodcast.com, or you can search for their unique podcast feed on your podcast subscription service. If you want to listen to everything all in one feed, just follow Halo Podcast Evolved, and you got everything you need there. Once again, shout out to our patrons. Thank you guys so much. You make it all possible. If you want to become a patron or learn more about what we have to offer through our Patreon, you can head over to patreon.com/Halo Podcast Evolved to learn more. And finally, if you want to leave us a voicemail about this episode or a previous episode or really anything Halo related, please keep it Halo related. You can give us a call at 205-EVOLVED, which is 205-386-5833. And with that, I've been your host, Oran, and until next time, evolved!
Evolved!